Well, all right, it's around about 4 p.m. Central European time, so we're going to get started, and I could not be more excited. Newsletters are key to my heart, so I'm so excited to bring everyone in our audience this webinar today. This is the second edition of WAN-IFRA's newsletter webinar series. And my name is Nicole Frankenhauser, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. In our first edition of the newsletter webinar back in June, we tackled the morning newsletter with the Philadelphia Inquirer from the United States and Germany's Kölner Anzeiger. And after the success of this webinar, WAN-IFRA wanted to spin off and do other topics. Our editorial community overwhelmingly voted for niche newsletters to be presented, and now here we are. So I'm delighted to have you join us today, and I can't wait for you to hear our excellent presentations that will be shared with us very shortly. Before we get started though, I want to notify you about some interesting virtual events headed your way. First up, we have next Wednesday on the 10th of November at 1400 Central European Time, a webinar focusing on publishers using e-commerce to boost reader loyalty and to diversify their revenue. This webinar is brought to you by Tipser, and it's free for WAN-IFRA members and non-members, so we hope to see you there. And then we have, starting on the 29th of November, our World News Media Congress, which will feature the World Editor Summit. And here we'll be discussing some critical editorial topics such as the 2022 newsroom and journalism in the age of influencers. So we have 4 days. It's going to be jam-packed with lots and lots of discussions for editors, and we're going to debate and have some very wonderful speakers that are on the agenda. So do check it out on our website. We'll see you there, and members can attend for free. And now let's get down to business. It's my pleasure to introduce to you these top newsletter strategists who will be sharing their journeys with you for the next hour. First up, we have Lauren Gustus, and she'll give a macro view on newsletter strategy and trends for us today. Then we have her colleague, Danielle White, who is sharing Salt Lake Tribune's religious-themed Mormon Land newsletter, and she'll speak on their membership model as well as speaking about the audience and how they showcase their journalism. Fanny Bonjean will round up the presentations, and she's going to break down Le Parisien's buying power newsletter in English. I do not want to butcher it in French. I already did that a few minutes ago. And she's going to speak on their communities, and plus, she's going to tell us why, out of all their newsletters in their portfolio, does this have the best opening rate? So we want to address the agenda a little bit. We're first going to hear all the presentations. So all three of our panelists will do their slide decks, and then we're going to open up the Q&A round. But at any time during this live webinar, please post your questions. We can't wait. In our last webinar on newsletters, we couldn't even get to all the questions. So please be as vocal as possible. We know that editors don't mind speaking their mind, and journalists. So we can't wait for your questions. So just type them in, and we'll get to them after the three panelists have finished. And of course, send your comments, your feedback, webinar ideas to me, nicole.frankenhauser at wan-ifra.org. I love to hear from y'all, and you're the inspiration for this webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the torch to Lauren Gustus. Lauren, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everyone. I had to practice that because it is morning here in Salt Lake and we have our coffee, or at least I still do. Thank you for joining us this afternoon at the end of your day, the start of our day. I'm going to share my screen and we will get going with the Salt Lake component of this presentation. So here I go. Give me just a second. All right. Hopefully you can all see a football stadium. It's the wrong kind of football stadium. I recognize that we're not talking soccer. We are talking American football here. The reason I chose this picture to start our slide deck out is because of what's behind the stadium. As you can see, there are some storm clouds out there on the horizon. And it's my job today to talk a little bit about those storm clouds. And then Danielle's going to take the rainbow and finish us up with where we've been successful and how we have found a path forward. Before we jump right into newsletters, I do want to set up for all of us here today a little bit of the backstory with respect to the Salt Lake Tribune. The Salt Lake Tribune is kind of a unicorn. It is the only major metro newspaper in the United States that has converted from private ownership to a nonprofit. And we did that through the federal government and our IRS system, which now recognizes us as a nonprofit. And what we were able to realize as we made that transition is the advantage that would come with having a group of devoted subscribers. So we're not a nonprofit that's essentially a startup. We came with a significant audience to a place where we can ask our supporters for support in different kinds of ways. And Danielle will get at that when we talk through Mormon land and what we've done with Mormon land and how we've experimented with Mormon land. So when I meet with people and when they ask how the Salt Lake Tribune is doing, I don't know if this happens to you, but this happens in the United States all the time. They kind of do it with a little bit of anxiety. It's like you're asking about, a sick relative or someone who's unwell. Is everything okay? How are you doing? Right. And they brace themselves for bad news. And this is understandable, as the health of American newspapers has been well documented that it is, generally speaking, poor because many hundreds of American newspapers are owned by big banks or hedge funds, right, who take the profit out of the organization, right? And at the Tribune, as you can see, we were extracted from one of the worst in 2016. We were bought by a family here in Utah named the Huntsman family that ultimately transitioned the Tribune to a nonprofit with a board as its steward, a board that's meant to represent the community. So the Tribune is now sustainable. It took some time. We did not find firm footing immediately, but we did find firm footing. And we are, thanks to support from subscribers, thanks to support from readers in the form of digital, right, advertising, and thanks to donors, able to make our way as a sustainable or profitable nonprofit. So here's what it looks like for us. You can see the revenue on the left-hand side of the screen. This is where, as I said before, we see opportunities for incoming donations, foundations and grants. We spent some time working on grant applications and also working on the list of expectations that come after those grants are awarded. Sponsorships, events, which I'm sure you all have experimented with or thought about in pre-COVID times and perhaps now even in COVID times in the virtual space, digital and print subscriptions, advertising revenue. And Danielle will get at some of the more interesting experimentation we're doing around Mormon land with respect to revenue opportunities. And then what do we use that for? All the things that you would, to do the journalism, for operations, to invest in our product, community engagement as opportunities allow and present, special projects. How do we innovate? That's important to us. Are there roadmaps that we can create for others? And yet, we've just been a 501c3 for about 18 months. So we're a 150-year-old organization, but we're kind of brand new. So we're working through some kind of big picture questions. What is our board supposed to do for us? What should it not do, i.e. interfere in the journalism? What constitutes a contribution in the eyes of our federal government, right? Is a subscription a donation that matters as we think about tax write-offs and as we think about our status? What does our revenue mix need to be as we look to be here for another 150 years? And this is where I think there's a deep connection to newsletters. And what does our mission look like as we think about our nonprofit status, does it change at all? The environment here in Utah is fairly unique in that the predominant faith is the Mormon faith. And in full disclosure, I am not part of the predominant faith. And one of the things that folks tell me all the time is we need you to do the accountability reporting that nobody else is going to do with respect to this powerful institution in your state. We will continue to do that. And yet, how do we also look to strengthen our communities? And what is the role we will play there? So 44% of our revenue comes from advertising, 37% from subscriptions, and 19% from philanthropy. As we think about where we go moving forward, it's really important to me and to our team that we build brands that will be relevant and essential regardless of platform. And so you may not have a predominant religion like the LDS faith in your community, but you, moved the wrong screen. Forgive me, Danielle. But you will have opportunities to leverage whatever is special or different or important to your readership, right? Or to your viewers. So it need not be the faith-oriented or faith-centric reporting. It can be, anything that is relevant. Maybe it's the soccer team or the football team, excuse me. Maybe it's state politics, right? What is the thing? Maybe it's food and drink. Maybe it's the consumer watchdog or consumer advocate experience that Fanny will share with us here moving forward. And I'm looking forward to that. What we're trying to do is to create a brand that will stand across print, in the e-edition, on the app, on sltrib.com, and also on platforms where people spend the most time, right? So that may be that, we've got to get serious about a podcast, which we do. We share a Mormon Land podcast every week. It may be that we need a very strong Instagram presence. Utah, in my view, and I'm biased, is one of the most beautiful states in the country. We hope you come see us. We have 5 national parks. Zion is here, Arches is here. We have great mountains, and the visual opportunities that present on social platforms such as Instagram for us with respect to that is critically important as we think about how we define where we will go moving forward. So where do newsletters fit in? Well, they can be top, mid, or bottom of the funnel, right? So up here, you're looking to bring people in. We call that top of the funnel, right? Mid funnel is how do we get people to stay, right? How do we get them to come back again and again? And then bottom of the funnel is how do we get them to pay? Or how do we, in the instance of the Tribune, get them to donate, to become supporters, right? And so in each of those kind of funnel components, you have different newsletters. My guess is you all talked about the morning newsletter last time. That's probably more of a top of the funnel play, right? So where does each newsletter fit, I think, is a critical question as we look at where we're going with respect to the goals and objectives for each newsletter. I want to just share a bit of insight on the church, and then I'm going to hand off to Danielle so that she can walk us through where we found success with the Mormon Land brand and Mormon Land newsletter. There are 6.6 million members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is also known as the Mormon Church, across the world. It is the dominant faith in Utah, and yet we see readership or listenership from folks all around the world who either have gone on missions and stayed. So the church asks that you go and serve your community, your church community in other places throughout the world, or they may be here in Utah. And we try to think about that because the audiences can be different. A Utah Mormon audience may be different than a Texas Mormon audience, may be different than a UK Mormon audience. So we're also cognizant of that as we look at what material we are sharing. But the church is a major, major influence, certainly here in Utah. And to be quite fair, throughout the world as it continues to grow, and it continues to grow in sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia, and elsewhere. So please, thank you. I'll hand off to you.
Thanks, Lauren. So as Lauren mentioned, we look at the broad Mormon audience as top, middle, and bottom of funnel. So we've decided to put some extra emphasis since about September on the Mormon Land newsletter. And our current subscribers, that's even raised since this, we've topped 8,000. And that growth has been about 70% just since September. We started September with about 5,000. So we've managed to grow this audience rather quickly. Some of that has been with paid social spend. We did receive a grant from Facebook to pursue and grow this audience and the Patreon, which I'll get to in a moment. But a lot of that has been due to organic efforts to grow this audience. The open rate is very high. It's about double industry average, and people do click through. So it's a very successful newsletter by all metrics. And so we kind of decided, we have this newsletter, we have an accompanying podcast that gets, goes live on Wednesdays. The newsletter goes live on Thursdays. Both are once per week. How do we use this as a retention tool? How do we use this to convert in different ways? Something interesting to know about the Mormon audience, particularly the local Mormon audience, is that for political reasons that I won't get into the nuance of, they might be hesitant to support the Salt Lake Tribune as an entity, but they do like reading this Mormon-focused, Mormon-related content. And we decided we needed to figure out an opportunity for those folks who wouldn't support the org but wanted to support the Mormon-specific work, a way to, pay us for the work that we do. So, Lauren, you can go to the next slide, please. So we kind of had to figure out, how do we use our expertise? Our lead writer, religion writer, has been with the Tribune 30 years as of today. She is a member of that faith, but also is, a really strong journalist. How do we use her expertise and that of her longtime editor to create something where they aren't doing a ton more work? We're just getting more savvy in how to use the great work they're already producing. So what you see here is on the left. So we do put a version of the newsletter on our website as a story. It basically only has the top main item with a brief, right? And then at the end, this top box that says want more, we encourage them to subscribe to the newsletter to get more content and or to support the Tribune with a donation to the Patreon. So we decided to start a Patreon in September to, again, have a way for those folks who don't want to support the larger Salt Lake Tribune, but want to support the Mormon land content to do so. And that has been successful. So we would consider this particular story that is the lead item from the newsletter the top of the funnel. Why? Because it will get SEO, because we push it on organic social channels that already have a lot of algorithmic power behind them. It will draw in new folks. We're also able to boost those social media posts, use lead gen capabilities on Facebook and Twitter, a little less so, but to get people to sign up on the newsletter. So we're getting people to sign up for the free newsletter. The middle portion of the slide is the top part of what shows up in people's email inboxes, the newsletter itself. And you can see that it's, we go into the same items, but it has about 4 or 5 other items underneath it, including a blurb about what was on the previous day's podcast and a link through to that. Okay. And then what you're seeing on the far right is what patrons see. So members who have signed up to our Patreon account, they get extra content. So where we led with the Book of Mormon gets a rewrite this particular week in the story and in the inbox newsletter. We led with rooting out racism and a look at LDS divorce rates in the Patreon. The Book of Mormon snippet is still in there later on, but basically, for the most part, every week is a little different. The main story that goes on our website is 500 words. The what shows up in people's inbox is 1,000, and what's on the Patreon is 1,500. So you're ultimately getting 3 times as much content on the Patreon as you are from the website. And that is by design, right? The more work that we're doing, the more you have to invest in us in order to get the content that we've created. Go ahead and next slide. And readers dig it. And one of the things that has been really interesting is we put this real effort over the past couple of months behind it, as we're reaching people who aren't Mormon. I think that there's a lot of mystique and intrigue around the Mormon faith. And so people who are Catholic, who grew up here locally, are interested because the Mormon faith really does have an impact of, every local's day-to-day life. We have, like Lauren mentioned, people of the LDS faith who do not live in Utah, but want to stay connected and in the know. And then you have the longtime readers who may or may not be LDS, but are just really there for the tea, as they say in America, all the great gossip. So this is breaking down the Patreon a little bit further. We have 3 levels that people can subscribe to, $3 per month. The main driver toward the $3 per month we've found is the transcript of the podcast, which in and of itself is kind of like its own newsletter, basically. That's the only place they can get it. And it's a very popular podcast. So we've seen a lot of, I guess, top of funnel in the Patreon sense, people joining just for that piece of it, the transcript. They also get to submit questions to upcoming guests for the podcast, and then access to the exclusive content, including the longer, fuller newsletter that I spoke of in the previous slide. The $9 a month level gives folks the ability to get some swag, including a coffee mug. Mormons don't drink coffee, so it says hot chocolate on it, having a little bit of fun with the culture difference there. Similar access to things, the transcript, whatnot. And they're also eligible for giveaways and swag. We, get an influx of books from Mormon authors and things like that we give away. And then the gold level, they got to participate in the live taping of the 200th episode of the podcast. They get to interact a little bit more. They got a copy of our 150-year book that chronicles 150 years of Utah visually, and a few other things. So it's not all sunshines and rainbows, though. We've seen a lot of success. We've seen a lot of growth initially. Couple of sort of headwinds we've experienced. One, we started trying text marketing, so SMS, and it has been a really hard sell. One of the primary perks of newsletters, right, is that you are getting people's information to communicate with them directly, where Facebook is more and more toggling back what news shows up in their feed. And that becomes, more pay to play and more difficult to bring in folks, especially organically from social media. You want to own your audiences. With the data, data changes we've seen over the past few years, with the Apple iOS changes, it's really important to have, that firsthand data and that connection point immediately. Texting is sort of next level of that, having their phone number and the ability to communicate with them immediately. That has been a hard sell, and we're behind goal on that, and we're still trying to figure out some tactics to accelerate growth there. The other thing, like I mentioned, is we've had a ton of folks sign up. We're ahead of goal, actually, at this juncture on the $3 per month level. But we've had a hard time getting them to upgrade to the $9 or $20 level. So we're thinking of, either adding more value at those levels, or, sending more communications that include, hey, this is what you're missing out on these levels. So still very much a new experiment for us, 2.5 months in, but we have a lot of, good track record to build upon at this point. The other kind of piece to this is how we get things in print. So this particular story, we did do a general conference is a gathering of the Mormon leaders twice per year. We did do a print insert that was about 14 pages that included exclusive content. On our website, we made that content subscriber only. But if you were a member of our Patreon, you got that content for free on the Patreon, and you got it the day before even our subscribers did. So again, looking for ways to provide value, and sometimes like fear of missing out, that feeling of exclusivity, playing off of that is one tactic we've seen be successful. And that's it from us, but I think we're going to kick it over to Fanny to talk about her newsletter.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm Fanny Bonjean. I work at Le Parisien, which is a French newspaper, which is located in Paris. And in 9 different countries around Paris. We're dealing with local and national news. We have 19 newsletters that we launched. It's been 2 years that we launched every one of them. So we have one today's edition for the newspaper, one national news, 8 local news, which is very important for us, and 8 topic-focused newsletters. So we're going to talk about these 8. We have one talking about politics, another one talking about entertainment, science, buying power, the one that I'm going to talk about later, food, about PSG, our soccer club, football club in Paris. And we have 2 temporary newsletters, one about the presidential election, which will happen in next spring, and one about coronavirus that we launched in the beginning of the pandemic, and I hope we're going to stop in a few months. We'll see. So the buying power newsletter. I wanted to talk about it because it's the one which has the best opening rate in our newsletter. And I think it's something that our competitors don't deal with. It's kind of our the Parisien commitment to be, because our audience is more middle lower class than upper class, and sometimes it can be hard to invite them to pay to have information. And I think the buying power is kind of a way to show that we deal with everyday issues that our audience can have, and that we are here to help them in their, on the struggle with their budget. So we send it twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. Sometimes during the holidays, it's just once per week. So I made a little video to show you how it looks like. So it is called Sam Rapporte, that I could translate by it helps me to earn money. We begin with the little menu of the huge topics that we're going to talk about in the newsletter. And the first thing we have in every one of our newsletter is an editorial of the head of the department. So here it's the head of the economical department. As Danielle said, newsletters are very important to create a connection, a link with our audience, with our readers, and in a very competitive world of news in the digital, it's very important, I think, to have this bond with our readers. So the first thing we do is to talk to our reader, to create this bond. And the newsletter it comes to the mailbox, it can be very, intimate. So we want to really reinforce that bond with that editorial. And then you can see, so you can see that there is a signature, there is a picture. If you click on the picture, it's sent you to the Twitter account of the journalist. So it's very important to be, I don't know if I can say incarnated. It's not just a robot. There are people talking to you, working for you. So that's why we really put some importance to have this picture and the signature to the editorial. And then we have all the different articles that we put in different shapes, in different colors. As you can see, it's quite different from a bunch of newsletters, mostly, I know, mostly American newsletters. You don't have a lot of text here. It's because this newsletter strategy, it's an open newsletter. Everyone can follow and read this newsletter, even if you're not a subscriber. But what we want to do is to have, at the end of the day, more and more subscriptions. So it's kind of a promise, and to create some frustration, say, all right, we have all those articles which can be interesting for you. We give you just the essential, the basic information you need to know. But if you want to have more, if you want to really know our advices, to read the whole story, then you click and then you have to pay for the whole article. So that's why there is no, that's why the text is very, very short. At the end of the newsletter, we always have a little goodbye message. Still this idea to create the bond, to talk to our readers. And then we have a little message to motivate them to discover other newsletters, to subscribe. And if they want to ask us a question, we have just in one button, they can send us an email. Oops, sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to click on this one, yeah. So who is it for? Mostly it's for people who don't have a very important buying power and look for any tips to well manage their budgets. And as I said, it's kind of the commitment of Le Parisien. Compared to our competitors are more upper class audience, which is more willing to pay to have information, and that's not our case. So it's quite difficult to say, okay, we have some news, we have different news from our competitors, but do you want to pay for this? And we have a study, and people said, yeah, I don't want to subscribe to Le Parisien because I don't know what they have who is different from the other. And it was a production that we had in the beginning in the newspaper. We have dedicated pages once a week to articles about buying power. And we say, okay, we have to go stronger on that topic because it's something that our competitor don't have, and it's really in our commitment. And as you know, in the website, on the homepage, you see news, hard news, but all the news that are more, cold, which is called cold in French, I don't know if it's that in English, more like magazine style, like buying power. It's something that you can't see if you go to the website. So you can see it from the social media, but it's not very effective. So that's why we decided to launch this newsletter. And so it's really the promise to connect with the audience and help them in their daily basis question about budget, the money. And so it's one leverage to motivate them to subscribe to Le Parisien. And also, as on the newsletter, it's kind of a services for those who are subscribers. They know that twice a week they have in their mailbox the essential of our articles, and so they don't have to search about it. It's just a service that we deliver, and they just have to pick up in the newsletter the articles that interest them. The results are quite good, actually, because it has the highest opening rates, and the ratio between audience and subscription is quite good. So it's been 2 years that we have launched it, and it stays at the highest opening rates about on the newsletter that we have. And I think it's something that really can make a difference between Le Parisien and our competitors. We are quite in our DNA, the DNA of the newspaper. What about the next steps? So for this one, I think we stay with this strategy. We are actually dealing with some reflection about the other newsletters. Today, all of our newsletters are opened, so you can read it and read them. And if you want to have the articles, you have to click, and you have to be a subscribers to read the entire article. So now we are thinking about maybe closed some of them, and then to launch other niche newsletters, because we decided to have a new strategy on some topics that we decided. We have a new specialized journalist, for example, about own equality between women and men. We have one journalist working on that subject. So we are thinking about maybe launching a newsletter about it. But it would be quite different from the one that I showed you, because the one that I showed you, the production articles, they are here. My team just have to pick some of them to put it in good shape, but we have the production. When we go to a narrow niche, like so this term that we called Sentinelle, which is about equality between women and men, we want to go further on the personalization of the newsletter. So we're gonna go like maybe Axios. We have one journalist who is gonna produce some specific content for the newsletter, and which is gonna be at the moment, just reserved to subscribers. And we did the same with the science newsletter. It's one journalist who writes this newsletter. So he has something really cool, which is a space where he answers all the questions that people ask in response of his newsletter. But it's a lot of work. You have to dedicate a lot of time because it has specific content about the buying power newsletter. My team, once they have the articles, I don't know, they have maybe just 1 hour of work to build this newsletter. So it's kind of really effective when you compare the time and the results. So that's it for me. And I think I will pass to Nicole for the Q&A.
Okay, wow, those were some fantastic presentations. I have learned so much in the 30 minutes that we've already been going on, and we're going to learn much more right now with all the questions that we have. So I'm going to go in chronological order. We have up here the question from Neil, and Danielle, this is going to have to refresh your memory. You said something about lead generation capabilities on social media. What did you mean in that context?
Yes, so instead of, this is mostly Facebook, is how when you're in the business manager side and you're creating an ad, you can create different types of ad. It's a lead gen ad. So you're asking them to give you information. So basically the ask is sign up for the Mormon Land newsletter, enter in your email address. We capture their email address from social media, then manually move it over into our email service provider, which is MailChimp, and make sure that they get added for the next week's newsletter. On Twitter, it's a little bit of a different process, but that's what I was speaking to there.
Oh, cool. No, that's a good tactic, and it makes sense now. Excellent. Then to Danielle again, why did you choose Patreon and not just your own platform? I actually had to look up Patreon before the webinar. Now I'm more knowledgeable about it, but it's a good question nonetheless. So do you mind answering?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think part of it is because this is a test and an experiment, and we didn't want to go through all of the expense and time and effort for our resources, which are limited, to build our own platform. So we wanted to see, we have this theory that, folks who wanted to consume this content but didn't want to support the Tribune with a subscription would be willing to donate directly for this type of content, but we didn't know that it would work. And again, we just started this in September, toward the end of September proper. So it's been less than 2 months. And so we figured using an existing platform that at least most American content creators, or at least somewhat familiar with, would be the better route to test this. Now, as we're seeing some early success, and if we're able to build and retain those supporters, it might be a good case to put some of our internal product resources toward building our own platform and getting that off Patreon. But for right now, in this experimental phase, it made the most sense to use an existing platform.
Excellent. And congrats on the massive bump. That's wonderful news.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Own Gang Joseph asked, how many articles are in the 20 USD subscription offer?
The amount of articles, or how many of the subscribers? I think I'll try to answer both. How many subscribers are at the $20 level? It's about 5% of our overall Patreon membership. 75% is at that $3, and 20% is at the $9 level. As far as articles, they get the same amount of content as every other level, and so that sort of varies week to week, depending on, if it's a conference week, there's a ton of content. If it's, nothing's really happening, it's a few pieces of content. Really, the perks there at that $20 level are more access to our reporters, more behind the scenes of, recording the podcast and things like that, and more swag is the current value add.
Nice. Okay, thank you. And we actually have a question to all of you from our panelists from the last newsletter webinar, Ashley Hoffman. Hey, hope all is well in Philly. Any pro tips on how to get more subscriptions and reader feedback? I love feedback. So aka people emailing the newsletter writers. It's a great question, Ashley. And so it's open to Lauren, Danielle, and Fanny. Whoever wants to jump in, go for it. Fanny, do you want to take it?
So it's how to get feedback from the reader. That's the question. Okay. So as you can see in the Buying Power newsletter, we have this button where people just say, "You have a question, you can ask us." It was very low in the newsletter that I showed you, but sometimes we just put this button much higher in the newsletter. And sometimes you can also just ask question in the editorial. That's why we have an editorial. You can speak to your readers. So it's a way to ask them about what they think, if there are a topic that they want us to deal with. So yeah, that's how we do, and then it's on social media, but that's how we do on newsletters.
I would just add, we don't have a button. Again,
Okay.
We are lean and mean, but we do in some of our newsletters. Actually, I don't think we're mean, but we add a just up at the top. Do you have a question or a suggestion for this newsletter writer? Here's her email or his email, please. Let us know. So we try to do that too. But I would say we've also started to do some just kind of like very informal survey work with our readers. Like, what do you like about this newsletter? What do you not like? What stories resonate with you, and so on and so forth. And so that reader feedback, which is purely built on, either a very reasonable survey platform or Google Forms, has been super helpful for us, not just in the newsletter space, but in other spaces too. As we think about this multi-platform approach, it's enabled us to make some discoveries around reader habits that I don't think we would have had otherwise. So just even asking via like a bit more formal and pointed kind of approach has been valuable. And I think readers really appreciate and feel like they're shaping their experience and they're shaping their news organization in a way that makes them more engaged.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good segue, Lauren, from Valerie, my colleague, who asks, are there other communities you have identified that could become an audience for a newsletter? I don't know if you could let that marinate in the webinar, but do you have any ideas?
Yes, we have a list. And as soon as I think we've decided with Mormon Land, we're going to experiment in all these places. And then can we create a set of best practices such that we can roll them into future content verticals? So for us being here in Salt Lake, which is the capital of the state of Utah, there's very little by way of political news, which is shocking. We are one of the few organizations that does it regularly and does it well. So how do we build a brand that has multiple tiers? And I'm not sure if this is a familiar component for everyone on this call, but a Politico Pro-esque, you're going to pay a lot more and get a lot more, right? And then kind of a mid-level tier, right, which is the accountability, the day-to-day, and so on and so forth. And then at the bottom, we've started to make our breaking and our daily reporting on the State House, on the Capitol, and our lawmakers available to any news organization in the state that wants to publish it, because there is not much of it, right? And so that's a little bit more of a public service oriented component. But yes, I would say State Watch. I think we have a great opportunity, as I said, with the outdoors and how people experience Utah outside. We've got a passionate fan base for a couple of our pro sports teams, as I know you all do as well. And I think that's an area that's ripe for some of the tactics that Danielle talked about, right? If you've got expertise, how many different ways can you package it such that you don't ask that reporter to do more? We're just going to do it a little bit differently.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I think you have loads of potential, because everyone kind of associates Utah with beautiful skiing, although I come from the south of the United States, never skied, but I know, the Olympics were there, and yeah, that's probably some great potential there. Next question is from Barbara Kaija. Hi, Barbara in Uganda. We're old friends. She says, thanks for the insightful presentation. For the mass newsletters, what is the acceptable industry open rate? I mean, the Tribune has amazing metrics that you've showcased us. 41% incredibly high. What you said is double the industry standards. But maybe Danielle, you can give Barbara a little advice on maybe like boosting that opening rate. Do we want to talk about subject? How do you promote what comes in their email inbox by the subject line? Or do you have any wisdom to share, Danielle?
Yeah, so industry average open rate for newsletter type content is 20 to 25%. Mormon Land specifically is at 41, but we do have other newsletters. We have a morning newsletter that's top stories that hovers around 30%. We have a food related one that also has a pretty high open rate. And then Lauren mentioned our 3 sports ones, and then we have a political one. Most of those hover in the high 20s to low 30s. So Mormon Land is by far our most successful based on the open rate metric. Yes, subject line is huge, but knowing what to write about is bigger, because obviously your subject line needs to reflect the content that's in it. Otherwise, it's sort of a bait and switch. You want to be able to deliver on whatever that subject line is. And so I think there's some experimentation to be had with, if you have 4 items in a newsletter, A/B testing which one is in the lead. You can also A/B test subject lines. You know, if we have an expert who we're interviewing, does it help to have their name on the subject line, or is it better to focus on the topic? You can get a little bit nuanced there, but really your open rate will grow as you better understand your audience, because you're picking more relevant content for them and you're highlighting the aspect of that lead item that goes in the subject line more succinctly, more directly, in a way that will engage and hook them.
Great. Well, thanks, Danielle, for that answer. I hope, Barbara, you got that. Good to see you here. We have another question from Matt Lines of Twipe. Twipe does personalization real well. So do you think there are any tools or tips like personalization that can add another dimension to your newsletter? Fanny, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we have the editorial, but we'd like to integrate more interaction, and we'd like in every one of them to have a space where we can answer directly from our readers, or to have section where it could be that topic that you told us to do, or something like that, to really increase the bond between the reader and us. At point to personalize the newsletter, we were thinking about this. It's technical, so I'm not really at it with that, but this technique that can enables you to put the first name in the newsletter. You can say hi Fanny, or hi Barbara, hi Danielle. So we were thinking about that, but actually it's not transparent, and I really want to put out the boats and just be transparent and talk to them, because if you have one mail which failed, and it's the wrong first name, or it's just some triangle, because it's not working, I think it just it's complete failure, and it's gonna put down all your efforts. So I would rather go with transparency. And because I'm dealing with in Le Parisien with newsletter and social media, I would say that you can't personalize too far the newsletter. I don't know how you can do that, but the work you have to do, it's on social media and on the way you answer to your audience. And that's why, for example, I ask my team on social media when they answer to someone to put their signature. So I would say Fanny for Le Parisien. It's a way to show that it's not robots talking to them. But that's it. I don't have any idea about that.
No, but I love your feedback on it, and also just because audio is growing in popularity. I know that Buying Power's 2 years strong. I would say that y'all have done a successful job in a short amount of time. Would you ever complement it with a podcast? As that, like, Mormon Land has one to complement their newsletter?
Actually, the newspaper has a podcast, which is called Code Source. And our podcast, it's our journalists which talk about a subject, a story that they published during the week or the week before. It's a way to go deeper in the topics, in the subject, in the story, and also to explain sometimes all the work that we had, on the question that sometimes an investigation can lean, and sometimes it's also a way to answer to some criticism that we have about our stories through that podcast. But this podcast is not topic focused. It's really it deals with all the stories that we published in the newsletter, in the newspaper. It can be politics, it can be entertainment. It's really, really large.
Oh, I love that. It gets the journalists really involved. Cool. Yeah. Y'all, we've got some amazing feedback. I don't know if you've read the chats, but we've got powerful presentation. Love the idea of leveraging the power of newsletters to be wherever everyone spends time beyond them. Thank you. This is an interesting webinar. So we're getting really good feedback. Justine asks, what's the initial investment for newsletters? Does anybody want to take that? Maybe Lauren?
I was going to ask Danielle to take it.
Yeah, Danielle, take it.
Do you want to go, Danielle?
Yeah, I can take it as much
Thanks.
or as little as you want, really, depending on your goals for the newsletter. Obviously, there's the technical cost of an ESP, an email service provider. Usually you pay by how many people you send to. So that can be quite low, honestly. Or if you want to do a super scrappy use a Google form and send from your Gmail account and to keep costs low. And then, the overhead, right? How much of your time is it taking to compile the newsletter and send the newsletter and track the data and things like that. That's a huge part of it. And if you're not seeing those returns, I think that's an idea that either you need to push and put some spend behind it to grow your audience, or you might need to either, refigure your concept and pivot on the content itself. And if you're really, understand if there's an audience for that particular newsletter, or kill it. Yeah,
that's all. That's okay too.
Sometimes that's the best
fail fast, right? Yeah, that's good. I want to end because we're 4 minutes short of a full hour, and this has been very dense with information. I want to go to our presenters on Mormon land and buying power. If you need to reach a community that is not in your traditional audience and get them to subscribe to your newsletter, how do you proceed? Top tips, because I think this is kind of like what's on everybody's minds.
Okay, I would say I think this is the hard work, right? So you've got to invest in that community, which means you got to listen, and that takes time, right? And you got to understand what they want before you begin to. This is appropriate for Mormon land. Spray and pray, right?
I love it. Spray and pray. Yeah.
Not a good tactic, right? If you're trying to grow new audience, I think you really have to deeply understand what that community wants, and you got to be patient. And I know that's really hard because we all want to grow like yesterday, but we have a community that we have ignored on the west side of Salt Lake City for years, and we've just invested some reporting there, and we're not seeing much traction yet. Right? Because there's not much trust, because we haven't been there for a long time, right? So understanding that you've got to invest in that community. And then the other thing I would say is, if you do want to put it on a little bit of a hyper speed, try to speed it up. Who are the partners that you might find in that community? Who are the influencers or the stakeholders that are deeply invested in who you might share something with, and they might share it with their networks, right? How do you get people to help you do the work if you do want to accelerate that timeline?
I would just add, as a sort of step 2, go where they are. In traditional and non-traditional spaces, we saw a lot of growth and success when we found on Facebook that there was a group that was LDS, Church of Latter-day Saints, another term for Mormon, Democrats, which is the more liberal leaning in our country. Once we found that group that had about 7,000 people and we started targeting them on social media, we did see a very large bump. So you have to do the things, to Lauren's point about the hard work. Sometimes you have to, when you're initially growing an audience, do things that don't scale to initially build that audience. And then you can go from there and automate and, figure out a process.
Excellent. And Fanny, any last thoughts?
Yeah. I'd say you have to know how they get information in the first place, because, for example, in France, young people, because we want to, you know, to get some young people into our audience that we don't have today. They don't, you know, they don't have any news app. They don't have, you know, they don't have some newsletter. They just go on YouTube, on Instagram. So you have to focus on that, what they want, and how they get the information. But it's a lot of work, and you have to think about how many task force you're gonna put in that, because, for example, on Instagram, it's really good if you want to, you know, that young people know your newspaper, but it's, you know, you can't have a lot of audience that come from Instagram. It's like, you know, just a way to show your brand and hope that in a few years, when they will be ready to pay for, you know, news, you'll be there. But, you know, that's kind of a bet on the future. So sometimes it can pay, sometimes it won't. So that's life.
Yeah, we can conclude with slow and steady wins the race. So just keep building and do the investment, like Lauren said. It will yield results, maybe not, you know, in short term, but long term. And I think that's a great spot to end it. We keep getting feedback and questions that we can't get to everyone right now.
And animate your community. I think it's really important today to have this respond to your readers. It on, you know, social media, on newsletter, on your website. I think it's the most important thing to do.
Yeah, in today's time, we've never been more social, so it's good to actually do the work to reach out to your readers, your subscribers, and make them feel important and part of the community. So I love that. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I want to thank Danielle. I want to thank Lauren. I want to thank Fanny for giving us such intriguing presentations. I'm going to eat up this Mormon land and the Buying Power newsletter. They're really great. Thank you for the inspiration today, Lauren. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we can all meet again at a newsletter webinar in the future. Again, get in touch with me if you have any ideas. Love to hear them. And in the meantime, good luck with all your newsletters, and we'll see you for the next round. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
And webinar recording will be available tomorrow. I'll send it to everyone. So enjoy your morning, ladies in Salt Lake, and good night, Fanny in Paris.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Ciao.